crack-a-lacking, guys and girls? Hopefully everyone's doing alright. I know I am. I do apologise that I haven't uploaded a video in a couple of weeks. Believe me, between work and other projects which I've been able to pursue, which you'll see that in due course, I've just had my hands full in relation to bits and pieces. But I've heard a lot of you in terms of me returning back to the Bafang M620s, and so I am doing so for the next couple of months. The specialised fleet has been put away, and I've whipped out all of my Bafang M620s and my M400 stuff, so you'll be seeing a lot more content in relation to that, as well as a couple new builds in which I'll be pursuing and obviously finishing off, and you'll see that again in due course. But the focal point of today is to concentrate on a particular display which I have installed onto the hardtail, the FLX blade, which is the Bafang 500C, which I've got to say, hand on heart, I believe it probably is the best EMTB rated Bafang display I have actually tested at this point. Now, I know a lot of you, when you hear the term EMTB, you naturally just assume e-bike, but for the purposes of what I'm about to discuss in relation to the 500C display, I'm talking about a display which is built for the purposes of basically mountain bike applications and off-road use, something which is going to stand up to the testaments of the rigours of things which may be prone and susceptible to braking if you were to use it, as well as the reliability, the functionality, the durability, and the consistency you're able to use the product without any issues. Now, of course, I just want to emphasize one thing. This is not a review of the 500C display. This is just my initial thoughts and opinions. I've only had the display for about a couple of days, and I've obviously installed it onto the blade because the original display I had on that bike, I accidentally broke. But nonetheless, anyway, we will be coming back to this display in the not too distant future for a full review, but this is more of an initial opinion and thoughts in relation to how I've been able to gauge the functionality as well as the form factor of the display compared to other Bafang displays, which some of you out there may even have on your existing e-bike or EMTB. Nevertheless, navigating through the display is very similar to previous displays which I've had on the M620s and M400s and other EMTBs which use the Bafang protocol. So in which case, me being able to understand how to get and access certain features is very, very easy. So I'll be talking about the good, I'll be talking about the bad, and all the other nerdy things which you guys may need to know if you're interested in getting this display. So let's dive into the pros, the cons, the good, the bad, and we'll go from there. So straight off the bat, you'll note that the 500C display is left mounted, it is not center mounted, so of course this does free up a lot of real estate on the cockpit area. So no longer am I forced to obviously just look at the display in the middle. Naturally it is gone, so of course there is nothing obscuring me from obviously taking my view away from the trails, which is beautiful. It is discreet, and in all honesty, when I actually bought this and actually arrived, it was a lot smaller than I initially thought. I mean, obviously the dimensions of the display, they do exist. You can obviously find them out. I'll leave a link in the description for you to check all of that information out. But it's only when you have the display in hand, you realize just how small it is, like for comparison. And I know a lot of you who probably watch my content are going to be more familiar with existing e-bike manufacturers like Shimano, Bosch, Bros, and so on and so forth. This unit, surprisingly, is actually smaller than a Bosch Purion display, which freaked me the frig out. I was like, whoa, like that's crazy. And in relation to the size of the display, it does allow you to obviously change the orientation of a lot of things you may have on your cockpit, such as your handlebar and your dropper lever. Now, of course, on the blade, I've moved my throttle lever so it's on the right side of my handlebars, and that's just something in which I prefer, because obviously on all of my e-bikes which use the Bafang systems, all of them use a dropper system, so of course I can't afford to have the throttle on the same side as where my dropper is. But nonetheless, this does allow me a lot of functionality in terms of changing things around, so I can get everything dialed in. One thing on which I will say, which a lot of advocates, when they talk about Bafang products, they don't really emphasize, but I will definitely talk about it, is that I am the kind of rider who will run 800mm and plus bars on his bike. And one thing which I have noticed regarding previous Bafang displays which I've tested is that, subject to how much cable which you can actually get protruding from either a center mounted display or a left mounted display, you are somewhat restricted as to how far you can have the display outboard or inboard, which then changes how you're having to orient every cockpit, because obviously you're going to have your handlebar levers, your brake levers, and your dropper lever in conjunction with your gear shifter in a perpendicular format so that you're not stretching for one more than the other on one side of the bar than the other. So I'm kind of thankful that this doesn't have that issue. There is enough cable for you to run. Again, this is 800mm bars, and there are some of my Bafang e-bikes which use 810. One is running 820, but you haven't seen that in good detail, but I'll be showing that in due course. But this is perfect. Like, as you can see, let me come to the forward or the front of the bike so you can obviously get a good look. And obviously ignore the hornet's nest of cables. I will be tidying that up, but just for comparison, as you can see, I'm able to run my dropper lever inboard, and the display runs next to the Magora lever right there. Now, because there is enough cable, I am able to move that further in. I will be doing so in due course. I just need to change the clamp system so that I can actually put my dropper lever onto the Magora MT5E. But I'll keep you guys posted in relation to that upgrade, because this is one of 3 bikes which run Magora brakes in my fleet, which is the Bafang. And of course, these levers are the one with the motor cutouts. Starting the display, it's pretty simple. So rather than for you to have like an on button where it's near the plus and minus, your on button is far right, underneath the unit. You hold it in for about 2 seconds and you are greeted with a hello, and then following from which it will obviously boot up and it will give you your schematics and all the data in which you'll need just by first glance. So of course it starts in level 1. Obviously you can see your percentage in terms of battery right at the top right there, your odometer in the middle, and of course by changing the schematics as to what it shows on the display by pressing the mode button right next to the on off or the power button, you can obviously just make sure I'm getting good zoom. There you go. So pressing that button and you can obviously change, so trip in time, or time, odometer in miles, obviously I've just done 10 miles obviously. Average speed 5.8. It is worth mentioning, because I know I did get a bit of stick on EMTB forums for using the Bafang M600. I have reprogrammed this motor temporarily so it does adhere to restrictions, hence why I'm using it for this video. But of course, as a lot of people know, the M620, it does kick out 160 newton-meters of torque, can exceed 28 miles an hour. I've covered this in the very first video of the Bafang M620, which I'll leave a card somewhere up here if you want to check that video out. But getting back onto the display, like I said, other readouts in which the display will obviously show. So again, average speed, obviously top speed 32 miles an hour. It's a hardtail, ladies and gentlemen. This thing will move, and obviously, come on, it's a hardtail, please. And obviously going back to time in minutes, and obviously you'll just go back in a complete circle as to all the other data fields in which you'll need to see. Obviously, how to change the levels of assist is dependent on whether or not you go up or down. So if you were to check the display, if I hold up, it'll go to 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. There is no readouts in relation to you having, say, like an eco, then trail, then sport, then turbo, or anything along those lines. It is literally just 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And again, going into the parameters of the display, you can actually go into it and you can change it. So you can have 3 levels of assist, 5 levels of assist, or 9 levels of assist. I can imagine the way in which I make some of my videos, I may have a little bit of ambient background music just to like lighten the mood. But essentially, as you press each button, whether it be the plus, the minus, the on-off button, or the mode button, you do get a vibration which comes from the unit, which is brilliant. Now, what this means, ladies and gentlemen, is, let's say on a hypothetical circumstance, it's a cold, rainy, snowy day or what have you, you're wearing gloves. Some gloves, obviously, you're not going to feel that tactile response. You're just going to press it in and you're just going to pray that something's happened. And obviously, if you've got a display, then sometimes you can obviously see if it's jumped into a different level of assist. But with that vibration, even with gloves, you feel the unit change, or you feel that obviously the motor's going to respond, but you feel that something's happened where it's an interface, like it's some kind of feedback where you know that something has happened, which is brilliant. I've not even thought of that, and that's something which I would have thought something like Bosch would have implemented on their systems, but hey ho, looks like Bafang beat them to the punch actually, because FYI, this display, it's not new. It's like 2 years old, if memory serves actually. I think it was Lunar Cycles who actually debuted this display way back when actually. Shout out to Lunar Cycles anyway. Of course, referring back to the accessibility side of things in relation to the buttons, obviously you can have it further outboard or inboard depending on how wide your thumbs are and what other kind of positioning and equipment you have on your handlebars. Again, whether or not you're rocking the SRAM Matchmaker or Shimano iSpec or the Magora clamp design, in which I'll be soon installing onto this bike, you can really dial in the position of this display. And the great thing about it is, again, like I said, I run my throttle system on the right hand side, but if you're someone who doesn't use a dropper seat post and you have a throttle, it doesn't really matter how far outboard or inboard you have that display. There is enough room for you to technically have the display covering the section of the throttle itself, so that you can actually get as much real estate or have as much room for you to basically have the how can I put this in a way in which you can understand? You can run the throttle where it kind of blends into the display and it doesn't take up as much room compared to some displays out there, which you're limited as to the position of the throttle, and then of course everything else has to kind of match around it, such as your brake lever or any other bits and pieces you have on your handlebars as well. Of course, going into the advanced settings of the display is very simple. Again, you would hold down the modes button for 3 seconds, and of course you are welcomed to a screen right here. So of course you can see, hopefully my phone will obviously show good, there you go. So you've got the measurements in terms of whether or not you want it in imperial or metric in the UK, so you know I'm going to be in imperial, i.e. miles per hour. If you hold down minus, it will cycle through all the other different things and parameters you are able to change. So again, screen brightness, obviously I've got it quite light. Auto off, so that tells you how long the bike is going to remain on before it turns off. Voltage, so you can toggle between whatever voltage of battery you're running. And then of course battery indicator in terms of the how much power you've still got left in the tank. You can have it in a percentage or you can have it in voltage. Obviously if you hit more and then press the mode button, sorry, you will need to type in the password. I do know what the password is. For the purposes of me trying to adhere to legislation, I will not put what the password is. But referring to the form factor of the display, which I gotta be honest, actually, it feels pretty durable. Like, I'm not trying to say like you could take a hammer and whack it and it will survive, but again, like, it does feel pretty decent. Obviously I've still got the screen protector on it, just to ensure that, you know, nothing happens to it. I mean, again, I'm not saying you could take a hammer and whack it and the screen will survive, but of course any little protection is better than no protection. But like I said, this is my initial thoughts and opinions of the display, so I can't really comment in relation to the longevity or the durability in that sense. But believe me, throughout the next couple of months, which I'm going to be using the M620 and the M400 and the M5 and M600 motors, you'll obviously see this display in its full functionality and its glory. So we'll obviously be trying to answer that question together, and let it be known, I will keep you guys in the loop. But positives aside, I will gladly say that there are a couple of negatives which I wouldn't mind just obviously just shouting out. But no, okay. So negative number one, which I've got to just get out the bat, and I know this is going to sound a bit petty, but yeah, I'm going to call it out. So in order for you to tighten this display onto the handlebar, you will need a 3mm Allen key. Now, I'm just saying, even though that this display costs around £50, it would have been nice if they included said 3mm Allen key. I mean, granted, you could argue that anyone who's messing around with Bafang stuff, you really need the tools in order to ensure that you've got everything kind of nipped up and torqued up and tightened and such, and there's a possibility that you would have a 3mm Allen key. But I'm just saying, like, it would be nice if they included one, notwithstanding the fact that not all Bafang displays use a 3mm. There are some displays which actually use a 2.5. So of course, you always have to make sure that you've got the correct Allen key in order to ensure that you tighten up certain displays and certain button pads on the handlebars. So again, even though this is using a 3mm Allen key in order to tighten it up, it would have been nice if they included it. The second negative, which I guess this more goes to the overvolters out there, who I know for a fact they subscribe to my channel actually, because I follow them, they follow me, and obviously we chit chat through different forms of social media like Instagram, and we have a WhatsApp thing and such. But the point being is, this display, even though I said that you can actually change the parameters in terms of what type of battery you can run, this display is only really compatible with either a 36 volt or a 48 volt. Now, as you can see, I have mounted it to an e-bike or an EMTB, which uses the Bafang M600. This motor has been tested by a lot of advocates, good friends of mine, who have tested it with either a 52 volt, which I also have done so as well. Actually, one of my EMTBs, which uses the M600, is running a 52 volt battery, re-engine Dorado style. You'll see that in a different video. And there's also e-bikes which use the M620, which test it at 60 volts as well, which they've been able to pull off. This display doesn't really work well with those type of batteries. You can use it, granted, but in terms of getting an accurate percentage in terms of how much battery you have remaining, it will not really work. Obviously, the battery I've put on the blade for today is the kilowatt battery. The third negative, and to be honest, for me, this isn't really a nitpick, but I can imagine some people out there who are familiar with Bafang system displays will probably think of it as a nitpick. There is no USB USB charging facilities on this display, sorry. So of course, there are some Bafang displays which, let's say if you've got it center mounted, or there's two which I recall which are left mounted, which you can use a USB type C and charge certain devices up, like your Garmin or your Wahoo, your phone, or something along those lines. There's none of that on this display, and obviously the display is just powered off. Again, reminding you, so in order for you to turn it on, power button is on the far right. Hold it in for 3 seconds and you are welcomed with a hello, and it'll obviously go back into level 1. That brings me nicely to the next negative about this display, which, to be honest, I have yet to have seen a Bafang display which technically does this, so it's kind of indicative anyway. But essentially, let's say for argument's sake that you leave the bike in level 3 and you turn the bike off. When you turn it back on, it will always go back into level 1. Now, I know that there are some e-bike systems which do the same thing. Essentially, when you do turn the bike on and off, it will always start in level 1. It is also worth mentioning, though this isn't a negative, but I didn't actually cover it, you can actually go into a minus, press minus from 1, and it will go into 0. And in 0, there is no pedal assist, and how I program the motor even in level 0, throttle is dead. So of course, just demonstrating, pressing it back into 1. There you go. I'm not looking forward to this actually, because I know the bike will launch, but there you go. Throttle is live even in level 1. Despite the fact that I've restricted this to 15.5 miles an hour, again, I've programmed it so I still get the full 160 newton meters of torque, so that throttle is still powerful. But yeah, basically, negative is when you turn the bike on and off, it will always go back to level 1. Okay, so this next negative, I'll be honest with you, I'm not too sure whether or not it's an anomaly for the display which I've purchased. Like, I'll gladly buy a second one just to make sure that it's not, but hear me out as I explain this. Okay, so like most people who decides to buy something, let it be known that I do my due diligent research in terms of what displays are potentially decent in terms of, you know, applications you're using for your e-bikes. And I did try and make some inquiries regarding the 500C display to see who's messed around with it. And I am thankful that through forums like Pedelec and Endless Sphere, a lot of people have put their testimonies in terms of how they've liked this display. The one thing which hasn't been commented on, which I've noticed, is the ambient warmth and heat which emanates from the screen itself. Now, as you can see, the screen is backlit and it is LCD. So, whilst I appreciate that there will be some warmth coming from that display, I never realized that, well, it's noticeable, but only when you actually put your fingers on the display and you realize the warmth or the heat which comes off it. Now, I gladly say that there's no heat which comes off the buttons itself, so of course, when you're touching the display, you're not like going to burn your hand or anything along those lines. But part of me was always thinking to myself, if I actually use you for a good 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, is that going to be a problem? Or is that going to be the straw which breaks the camel's back in terms of the reliability or durability regarding the display? Again, I can't comment at this point. We'll obviously need to test that out. But if anyone else has experienced that in terms of the warmth or the heat which comes from the screen, definitely comment down below. I'm curious, because if it's just me, then ignore that. But if this is a common thing, yeah, please let me know in the comment section. But negatives aside, or critiques as you could call them, I still say that this display is actually pretty decent. Like, you know, if I were to compare it to the other displays in which I've ran on the Bafang stuff, yeah, it far exceeds it. I mean, for one, I'm actually able to get an accurate gauge as to how much battery I have. Like, I remember the Victrix Monty, I changed the display on that because, funnily enough, I accidentally cracked that display. And, you know, that's just an LED. So I've got 5 LEDs, which you'd think that it gives you 20% increment in terms of the battery. But in essence, it kind of doesn't. It's not truly that accurate. And then, of course, with the stock original display, which comes on the M620 stuff, which the name of the display itself escapes me. I'll leave it somewhere on the screen for you to obviously check out, as well as in the description. Yeah, that display gives you more readouts, but in terms of the form factor on that display, it takes up too much real estate on the display. And not to mention, with the cable which protrudes from the display to the controls, it's just another point of vulnerability, notwithstanding the fact that if you were to have the display oriented where it kind of protrudes away from the handlebars far forward, or even if you have it resting on the stem itself, anything happens to that display, you cannot turn that bike on. So effectively, you've got to get a new one. So yeah, but nonetheless, anyway, I'd say that this is probably one of the best displays I've actually tested. And of course, we'll be coming back to this display in due course, but I'm going to wrap things up here because I can see that my phone is running out of battery. If you've enjoyed this type of stuff, make sure you hit that like button, comment down below. Expect more Bafang M620 and M400 and M5 and M600 stuff in the not too distant future, well, over the next couple of months, should I say. And until then, guys, take it easy, stay safe, peace to the journey, #FABT, and I'm going to catch you then. Peace.